And we are live. Fantastic. So welcome everyone to this, our second in our coaching series. We're going to take a look at skills, models, techniques. I'm going to start to dig down into coaching a little bit. Some quick logistics as we get started. Your host today, myself. We also have a guest speaker again from our coaching practice, so very happy and excited to have Barb on the line for that, and we'll be introducing her in a few minutes. Sound and technology, sometimes when we first get started the sound is a little bit off, so have a bit of patience, it will come around. Any technical issues, we've got Scott in the background helping us out. Pop into the chat if you have any issues or send an email. As always, we record these sessions so that if there is an issue, you'll be able to pick it up later. We have the little man icon at the top. You can click on the drop down there, raise your hand, speed up, slow down, that sort of thing. If there's any issues, Scott will be monitoring that. As always, down your right-hand side of your panel, we've got the chat window for you to pop in anything, comments along the way, questions as they pop up, that sort of thing. As always, we'll be making this an interactive session, so we will have polls and questions and those elements. And as always, we do accept applause. Okay, so our opening thought for today, this comes from Michael Bungay-Stainer, and if you've ever had the chance to see Michael speak at a conference or work with him and all, he's a fantastic gentleman, really good guy. Focus on the real problem, not the first problem. This is going to kind of lay into a theme of what we're going to look at today. So many times, whether that be in projects or just in life in general, we are tackling the first problem, the thing that pops up, and we often get very tactical on that. We're dealing with the issue that's in front of our nose versus the bigger, longer piece. And hence we get distracted from either our more strategic goals. We may even get distracted to the point where we don't complete the project itself. So, really figuring out what the real problem is. We also come up with solutions to symptoms, and then hence we don't cure the disease, as it were. So we don't deal with the real problem that's underlining. And that's really going to be a big theme for what we're going to talk about today. Now, in our last session, we talked a little bit about coaching. We introduced it. This was our first coaching session last time. And we talked a little bit about managing versus coaching. And managing is really being very prescriptive and telling people what to do. Coaching is really more that questioning and that drawing it out. We're gonna dig into that. One of the myths we dispelled in our last session, though, is that coaching is slower. And it's not. You're going to get higher levels of engagement. You're going to get more effectiveness. And as I was putting this session together and preparing and sort of reflecting on what we did last time, I remember a project that I was on. I wasn't leading this one. I was more observing it, actually, because it was happening in an area of my life that I volunteer in. And as I was keeping an eye on this project, because it was a very interesting one. They had a team of 10 people, and it was not going well. That team of 10 left the project, and there was 2 people who replaced them, and these 2 were highly engaged, highly motivated, and the team of 2 majorly, like seriously outperformed the team of 10. This is what coaching approach will help us get towards, is folks who are more engaged, folks who are more there, that the whole hearts and minds piece where they're there because they want to be there. We also touched a little bit on the emotional intelligence piece, the whole, we have our emotions, it's what we do with them. And we're going to, as we continue on this series, we're going to dig into that a little bit more. And then we touched very briefly on the coaching skills piece, which is around listening, asking questions, giving and receiving feedback. And that's really where we're going to start up and pick up today as we continue down this journey. Just before I do that, however, I want to fire off our first poll here, and this is a repeat of the poll from last time. Why don't you just get a sense where folks are today? We asked this poll last time. Got a different audience today, so I'd just like to get a bit of a sense of where everyone's at today. So if you could just pop into the poll there, and are you using a coaching style currently? So yes, no, yes, but did not realize that that's what I was doing, and no, but intend to start. And really just looking for a sense of where everyone is at. Let's give it a few more moments. we're past the halfway point of our audience chiming in, so we'll give it a few more moments. Got a good crowd today. All right, we'll shut it down. I'm going to end the poll and broadcast the results. So it looks like we have a fairly savvy group with us today. 57% are answering yes, I am using a coaching style. Fantastic. So hopefully today what we can do for you is round out some of those skills. 11% are saying no, not using a coaching style. And then we've got another 15% who are saying yes, but did not realize it. So we're looking at somewhere close to 65%, 75%, excuse me, of folks who are actually using a coaching style today. And this, I think, is very indicative of where we see, the modding working world and folks who are, really coming at managing people in general, but also managing their projects at much more of that coaching collaborative piece. And then we've got 15% are saying no, but intend to start. So, this session is perfectly aligned with that audience, and thank you so much for sharing that so that we can have an idea of where everyone is at. So I'm going to introduce our coach today who's joining us. Here at TidalShift we have a coaching practice with several coaches, and fortunately Barb was able to lend us her time today and join us on our session. So Barb comes to us with a great deal of experience. She is a certified coach, has been for many years, has her own practice in that, and joined the TidalShift team, it was about a year ago or so, and really happy to have her on board. So Barb, are you with us? Oh, there she is. And you're still muted. Let's do a quick unmute. There we go.
Thank you.
Hey, there we go. Now we've got you loud and clear now. Oh my goodness, we got a little bit of an echo happening there. Okay. So Barb, we've been talking a little bit about coaching and what that looks like, and I'm curious, how do we implement this? If you could kind of help us understand a little bit about what we can do to implement coaching within project management.
So one of the things that we're going to go over today is I'm going to provide you with a framework for actually taking a coach approach to asking questions that provide clarity and develop resourcefulness and even more autonomy in the people who you work with. Also builds competence, and with the competence comes confidence. And as a result of all of that, it encourages responsibility and, probably what's most important to you as performance managers, accountability. And so the way that we go about doing this is asking open-ended questions, as was talked about in last month's webinar, and the framework will just help you make sense of how to structure and organize your questions.
Excellent, excellent.
Also, one other thing I wanted to mention about the framework is it helps provide focus. And I mentioned structure, but it's kind of a flexible structure. And that has you working with team members in order to get the results that you want.
Beautiful, and I love that whole working with team members piece, because so many times it feels like we're kind of at odds with our associates. It almost feels adversarial in nature. And thank you for bringing some structure to this, because I think a lot of people who are new to this, especially as we come from a project management background with lots of structure, we look for that structure as to how can we do this, and providing some of that structure will make those first few steps a little bit easier, and then as we develop the skills we can build on that creativity a little bit.
Okay.
So I understand we're going to walk through the Oscar model today. So just give us a quick highlight of this, and then we'll step into each of the individual steps.
Perfect. So this might be a process that you are quite familiar with, just looking at how you do things from a slightly different perspective. So outcome, you start off with, what's the end result that we want to achieve? What's the outcome? What I love about this is it's starting with the end in mind, which is a strategy that Stephen Covey has talked about in his book on 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's an older book. It's been around for a while, but the concepts are still very relevant. And when you focus on the outcome, everybody has a common direction to which they're going. Then you jump into the situation. So you've got a sort of a clear understanding of where you're going, and then you come back and you take a look at, well, where am I now? What's my current situation? And this might sound familiar to you, and you might know it as doing a gap analysis, where you identify the future state, the current state, and then you see that there's a gap in between. And the C for choices and consequences helps you to start brainstorming what are the options that we should consider in order to reach the outcome that we need. And then once you have, let's say, 3 choices and you've tested them against what are the pros and cons of doing these choices, then you can move into action. And that's when actually in the choices, that's when you're starting to do your action planning. And then in action, you're implementing your action. And review is the last step, where you not only review the full outcome of the project, but you do a continuous review all the way through. Again, something that I'm sure that you already do, and we're going to show you how to use the Oscar model to do that.
This is, as you're walking us through this, Barb, it feels very project managey. We start with the end in mind, and I popped the 7 Habits Stephen Covey into the chat box just in case anyone wants to make note of it, because it is a fantastic book, and it's one of those oldies but goodies. It really stands the test of time. And as we look through that model, what's the situation? Where's our gap analysis? Where are we going? What are the choices? What are the options? Let's plan this out. Let's take action. And then, as we do in projects, we do that review. We do that, close out. What have we learned? So let's dig into these steps. Oh, there's Oscar. All right.
Now for sure, you're never going to forget the Oscar model.
Good memory. All right. So I'm just going to pop a quick question to the team that's out there and ask them, when we think about the Oscar model in coaching, we're asking for input from the team. What are you currently doing to keep your team on track to desired outcomes, assuming you're using a coaching approach? So 75% of our team is out there using a coaching approach. A common pushback here from project managers is, well, I need to decide where we're going. So how do we do this, but yet still, avoid scope creep? So give everyone a few moments and type in the box on the bottom. I see multiple attendees are typing right now, which is always my favorite. Okay, so Megan is our first one. And she says, personal goal setting. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, Megan. If you could expand on that for me a little bit. Navpreet, continuous feedback involving the team members and empathy. Absolutely. So this is not a one-time thing. We don't and this is one of the criticisms of waterfall versus agile, is that we can't fully define the scope and it needs to evolve and change. And we're kind of saying the same thing there, that we need to make that a continuous conversation. From Sheila, regular team weekly meetings on project progress. And Sheila, you raised a really, really good point here. We need to be talking to our team on a very regular basis. From Rudolph, frequent check-ins, open door policy. Oh, thank you so much for that, open door policy. This is a favorite topic of mine. About 20 years ago, I had the very good fortune of working for someone who not only had an open door policy, but actually lived it. And as a bit of a fun thing, I'll often ask my students, my classes, who's had a boss with an open door policy, and inevitably every hand goes up. And they say, how many have actually lived it? And half the hands go down. So yeah, we need to have that communication piece. From Sheila, regular one-on-ones, and that's an important detail there, Sheila, that we're going to dig into, which is it needs to be that one-on-one communication. From Millar, two-way communications. Absolutely, we need to be hearing from folks. Sitting down and telling your team what's going on, that's not effective communication. From Loy, employee rounding. Okay, Lori, I'm going to ask for a clarification on rounding. from Lauren, we always come back to the project goals and talk about how the team feels about how we're going to meet those, right? So we can have that conversation around how we're going to meet the goals. And I kind of look at this as sort of putting the boundaries on the sandboxes as we play. Regular meetings, track progress, ask the team why they feel, um, ask the team what they feel is working, what isn't around the project goals from Lauren again. From Sheila, oh good. Listen to employees and actually put the ideas into action if they are doable. Okay. Okay, there's the clarification from Megan. Around the personal team's goals and their performance and their expectations. Right, so not only dealing with the project itself, but also the goals of the team and the individuals. And this is, I think, a very important point that we don't want to lose. When we're running a project, yes, we need to deliver the deliverable, but we also need to help support and build the team, because if we can finish the project with the team intact, in fact, not just intact, but actually some growth in the team. So they're doing a little bit better than they were before. That's going to be a really good day. Okay. So I see Ian and Lori are typing, so I'm just going to give them a few moments. Employee rounding. Oh, good. Here we are. Intentional approach for obtaining employee feedback. Going back to them and ask feedback, different approach around open door policy. Oh, I love it. Yes, because we do need to make it intentional. You need to, not only do we have that open door policy, but we need to actually, ask for that and solicit it and drive it, because just, having the vehicle for people to ask the question, is not going to be enough, because some people won't take up the offer. So we need to make sure that we're actually doing this at a level that is going to, the people are actually going to leverage. Okay, so back to our expert. Oh, look at that, perfect timing. She reappears. So outcome, let's dig into that a little bit more.
So the outcome, and you have some great already practices in place for making sure that you stay on track on the outcomes with your performance, performance management and project management process. And for this webinar, we're looking at questions that help you understand what the team members think. And a sample question would be, well, what would success look like? But this isn't only what would success look like for you, it's also what would success look like for your stakeholders, for the people who are relying on you to deliver on the project. And it is a chance for you to provide your own input. So, everybody creates a deeper understanding of what the outcome is. It's kind of like, having puzzle pieces that fit together in one final puzzle, and everybody sees the same picture. So it's almost like a 360 perspective of what's going on.
So a bit of a almost a negotiated here's where we're going, how we're going there piece, so that it becomes both sides are agreeing.
Exactly. And the outcome is usually short term and long term. So for the long term, this might be something that you work on with your team at the beginning of the project. What's the final outcome? What do we want to deliver to our clients, to our stakeholders? When is it going to be? How are we going to do that? And it can also be short term, and you've already talked about that, where some of you have ongoing meetings on a regular basis just to make sure that everything is on track. And, again, some of the questions that you can ask related to that are, how will you know that we've achieved it, either the short term or the long term?
Absolutely,
If we've
absolutely.
fallen shy of our goal, what will the impact be? What will the impact be if we miss this deadline? What will the impact be if we don't address a particular action?
So much like what we do in project management is we're constantly layering in some of that risk management piece. What are going to be those consequences?
Absolutely. And Dave, you already mentioned this, but rather than telling them what the outcome is going to be, you're jointly creating a common outcome. And that, I think, really allows for greater clarity, and that you're all driving towards the same destination, which is exactly the image that Dave has on the map there. Although you might be flying to that destination?
Well, we take whichever mode of transport works best. So, when we think about that outcome, there's my outcome as the project manager, what I want to see, but then there's also your outcome, what you want to see. And, when we can make those work in concert with each other, I think that's when we're really going to get some real magic happening. So here's for the next step, I'm just going to pop into a poll here and want to ask the question, let me get to the right poll. Want to ask the question, do you ever perceive the situation differently than your team? This should be a fairly quick one because we've got a simple yes, no, and all the time, which is really kind of yes. And of course, if we're having a more open discussion on this, I'm sure there'd be people saying depends. So I'm going to let you decide which one of the three you're going to choose. I'm going to force you into one of the choices. Okay, we just passed the halfway mark. I'm just going to give it a few more moments. And really want to thank everyone who's on the webinar today. And I'm finding this generally as we go. We're getting very good, not only feedback from the webinars themselves, but the participation during the polls and questions and things, because it really helps enrich it, I think. Okay, so a couple more seconds. We're about 3/4. All right, let's end the poll here, broadcast the results. So pretty high, overwhelming results here. We've got over 80% are saying, yes, we do perceive. Now, it's not going to be every time, that's for sure. And of course, and this is just a short discussion point. 16% are saying no, which is, I'm really, it's going to happen on occasion. If I'm going to guess that the people who are saying no are saying the majority of the time no. And you know what? Hats off to you, because if you've got that kind of record, you're doing something right. So, keep doing it. Communication is really tough. It's super easy to miscommunicate. And, that's a big piece of it, is our perception versus, the other party's perception. Okay, so back to Barb. Situation. Talk to us a little bit more detail around the second of our Oscar model, which is situation.
So once you have a clear outcome and you've got a clear focus of what where you're at, then and where you're going, then it's really important to look at what's actually happening. You want to unravel the different perspectives that people have on your team. You're clear about the outcome, and you've probably communicated that clearly to folks. And we all listen to information through our own filters. And so I may interpret what the current situation is differently than my colleagues working on the project. And again, it gives you the opportunity to put it together. What I love about and let me jump to the perception versus reality. So what it allows you to do is check your perception of what the situation is with everybody else's and vice versa. And sometimes by working on this together, you're actually creating a new reality. And there's something.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, my perception is your video camera's not working right now. But that's a very interesting point, that we end up generating a new reality, because if my perception's a little bit different than yours, it's not that I'm abandoning mine and adopting yours or vice versa. It's that we're blending them together.
And in your case, your perception was everybody's reality. So what I also want to say about the situation is you can do a very high level overview of what the situation is, or if you have developed trust and openness and people on your team aren't afraid of talking about things that aren't working, then you can get a really clear picture of what the current situation is and then how close or far you are from the actual outcome.
Beautiful. And that element of trust is so key, and this is something that a lot of project managers really struggle with. Trust takes time to develop and work on. So Barb's been, I was introduced to Barb probably about a year ago now, and so over that time, albeit a very short time, and we don't have a huge amounts of interaction, but we've both been working on developing a relationship, developing the trust, and so far, knock on wood, things are going well. it takes a second to break that trust, but we think about project managers who are often being introduced to the team on the kickoff of the project, and you're expected to form and coalesce as a team instantly, and that can really be a struggle. Let's move into choices, the third of the Oscar acronym. So let's dig into that a little bit.
And before I jump into choices, I just want to point out that one of the things that might be different about the Oscar model is that we didn't start with the situation. We started with outcomes. And the reason for that, and you can reflect on conversations or discussions you've had with your teams, is sometimes when you start with the situation, you get into a bit of a rabbit hole of issues and problems, and it's difficult to get out of there. Sometimes it can be complaining. When you start with the outcome, you've got something positive to reach for, and then tapping into the situation is just a checkpoint, and it helps to put the markers in your gap analysis so that you can then move into choices. And choices is where you begin the planning phase, and you take a look at, well, what choices do I have? What choices do we have? And you do some brainstorming, generate some multiple possible choices on where you're going. And ask the team also, of these choices, which ones do we have control over? Which ones do we have influence over? Because it's really important to be able to act on the choices. And for each choice, you also want to consider, what are the pros, what are the cons, what are the strengths, what are the benefits, what are the upsides and the downsides. And you'll see on the slide that it talks about a little bit of risk management. And yes, this is very similar to looking at, well, here's the choices. Let's look at the upsides and the downsides. What are we going to do if we've got some real issues? And so you've now got some risk management or contingency planning, and it really helps you then come to the choice that is most palpable or most doable in order to reach the outcome that you're looking for.
Excellent. And I love that you highlighted the risk management piece. It's a topic very near and dear to my heart. From a project management perspective, this is the biggest determinant factor of success in a project. And if we're not layering this in every aspect of it, honestly, I think we're not doing our jobs. The other piece that I really liked about what you said there was around the, let's do a little bit of analytics here. And, for the folks who are a little bit more analytical, that want to have the evidence behind that, as I like to refer to them, the Spocks of the world versus the Kirks, and, who need to have that analysis and have that backing up of the data, there's definitely a way to do that. Now, if I'm more of a Kirk in my decision making, I'm going to make my list of choices. I won't necessarily dig down as much into the analysis of it, but I still have a framework that's going to help me, not be, too improvisational and actually put a little bit of structure around that.
There's one other thing about choices that I wanted to mention before we move on, and that's that it allows you as project manager or even as a member on the team to stay neutral. So there are choices that are put out, and if you as the project manager have your preferred choice, if you're able to self-manage and hold back on that for a little bit, you may be surprised and see that your team is coming up with choices that are even better than the one that you thought that the team should take. And it also allows you at the end to kind of throw in your preferred choice if it hasn't really been touched on. But where you get the buy-in is then by having your team talk about, so what are the upsides and the downsides of this new choice? And then perhaps help them see that that's the one that's going to help you get to your outcomes the quickest.
Love it. Fantastic. Thank you for that addition. It reminds me of a favorite project success story that I encountered. It's a construction project. They built a multi-story office tower. It was a relatively small one. I think it was 4 or 6 stories. And that was phase 1. And phase 2 was almost the identical building. Right? Pretty classic scenario where, you put the 2 towers up, you built the one first, open it, build the second. The second one, in the first one, the project manager was my way or the highway. He took no input from the team. He was, very prescriptive, told them what to do. In the second one, they had a different project manager. And that project manager took very much the coach approach, took very much the let's hear from the team, let's have a conversation, let's discuss, and he welcomed input and ideas. They literally cut the project in half. Half the time, half the budget, same building. Right? So it does work, it really does. Now, on the surface, it can be a little scary because, of course, we have death by committee. We have, endless meetings that feel like they never get anywhere. So you know what, I'm going to stop doing that, and I'm just going to tell everyone what to do and drive this. After all, I am the project manager here. But, when we manage it correctly, it's going to be very effective. So I'm going to manage my time here and move on. All right, so to our second question. And anytime we get into the conversation of a decision, I always like to pose this. When do you know if the decision that you've made is right or is wrong? And I want to be very definitive on the word no. When will you know 100% if the decision you've made is right or wrong? Our first one in here. Christopher, when you evaluate your decision based on your set criteria. So Christopher, I'm just going to get you to expand on that. When you say evaluate the decision based on the criteria, are you talking about evaluating it before you've made the decision and actioned it, or evaluate it after you've actioned it? From Lauren, when you evaluate the outcome, oh, thank you, Lauren, absolutely. We think about the outcome of the decision and, what does that look like? By the project team reaction, when you discuss in the weekly meeting, some good points there, Malar. It's, we need to not only think about our take on it, but our team's take, and especially when it's something we're deciding on how the team is going to respond to that. Because while it may be the best technical approach, if it's not being embraced by the team, we're not going to have success. From Lori, when you've made an effort to evaluate the outcome, including your stakeholders, love it, bringing the stakeholders in there when you see impact or benefit. Chris, after you've actioned it. Okay, Chris, thank you, Christopher. I was hoping that was going to be the answer. Happens different times, but Tennessee seems at completion. From Rudolph, absolutely. Sheila, depends. Most of the time you know when you receive team feedback and evaluate the results based on regular check-ins with the team. From Olga, when you receive that feedback, absolutely. So pretty unanimously, it's after the decision has been made. So when we think about, the whole decision-making piece, and the reason that I like to bring this up is because it's easy to fall into analysis paralysis. It's easy to fall into the I'm afraid to make my decision because I want to make sure it's the right decision. So if I get too much on the analysis side, I can stall and potentially cause myself other problems. So I'm going to invite Barb back in.
Here I come.
There she is. All right. So actions. We're getting the second half of our Oscar model. Talk to us a little bit about the actions.
The choices and analyzed which one is closest to your outcome, then you can choose the one that's going to get you there the fastest, the most efficiently, and this is your detailed action plan. So the key question is, so what actions will we take? And this is also where your team members can have a clear idea of the steps that each of you are going to take and how they interact with one another in making sure that the final outcome is achieved. They can take responsibility for their own actions, and they understand where there's a dependency on what they're doing and what somebody else is doing. You can also ask questions like, what might get in the way? Or as the project manager, what do you need from me in this as we take steps moving forward?
Absolutely. So we need to make sure that we're still living our role of supporting our team. We're not handing over, we're not abdicating authority, we're not abdicating responsibility in any way, shape, or form. We're helping direct it and support it going forward. And really the real beauty of a more coaching approach is that we're going to get that greater engagement and greater, as you say, accountability, which I just love that way of describing it. What actions are we going to take? How are we going to implement them? So here's our part where we detail out the action plan. How are we going to get to that? And very key here is the implement piece. And I know this will be very near and dear to our project managers' hearts. How do we get that thing implemented and done. So now's the time when we can, really dig into that, take that action, and start to generate some of those results that we're always being judged upon. So we now get into, we have thought about our outcomes, we've looked at the situation, done that gap analysis, we generated a bunch of choices, we made a choice, we've detailed that, we've taken action. It seems like we're all done,
So
but we
the
have another
last
step.
step, and I love the image of the previous slide of the take one, take two. Well, the review, you not only, as you've already mentioned, do this at the end of the project, but you do it throughout the project. And for those of you, with experience in projects going off track, I'm sure there's some of you. The review gives you an opportunity um, to look at mistakes, not mistakes, but mistakes, and take them over again. So just recorrect, get back on course. Um, Looking at if it's still an interim review, to what extent did achieving the steps we do hit our existing milestones? Um, in what way might we have fallen short? What can we do now? And the review is an opportunity to learn what worked from the existing project, but also to learn and plan for future. And and again, by asking your team members and perhaps also asking your stakeholders, it's a collaborative process. It's working together and moving forward to create even better results this time and the next time. And oh yeah, go ahead, David.
No, go ahead.
If you have a comment about the review, I was just going to comment about the overall Oscar model.
Okay. Yeah, so just wanted to kind of finish out the review piece. For me also, it's kind of, as you're describing this, it's kind of like our lessons learned that we do, right? What went well, where do we have that improvement? Love that mistake versus mistake differentiation. And this is part of my motivation behind asking the previous question of when do you know your decision was the right decision? One of the things that I always found very good advice for myself, and I share this with my students. Um, you can always make a second decision to correct the previous decision. So in this review step here is, did we get the desired results that we were looking for? Did it work? If it did, great. Let's figure out what we did and let's do it again. If it didn't, let's step back and redo and fix and adjust. Um, Particularly in Western society, we tend to really shun mistakes. It feels like we're expected to be perfect every time, and we're expected to, get it right the first time. And you ask that question around how do we treat adults when they make a mistake, and the typical answer comes back, well, we chastise them, we berate them in some way, and say, you made a mistake, and this was bad, and this was wrong, and what were you thinking? But think of how we treat a toddler, an infant. Johnny stands up, takes his first few tentative steps, and falls flat on his face. And we don't chastise him and say you made a mistake. What were you thinking? We encourage him. You did great. Try again, right? But then as we get into adults and into business, we tend to not treat people very well when it comes to mistakes. And this is where there's the irony of innovation of, if we're going to be innovative, we're going to make mistakes. That's the nature of the beast. But it's about whether we learn from those mistakes or not. So I'm a huge fan of the adage of the only true mistakes are the ones we don't learn from. And really that's what I'm hearing around this review step. It's all about, did it work? So first of all, let's make sure that what we did had the proper causation, because if it didn't, we need to step back and redo. But also, let's learn from that. Let's have that continuous learning, because that's how we're going to get better and drive our results forward. So back to you, Barb. You wanted to
Yes.
chat
So
about the
while
overall
Oscar
model.
appears to be a very linear step-by-step process, it's not really. It very often you can start with the outcome that you want. You identify or assess the current situation, and you start your choices. You may even start your action plan, and oops, your client or stakeholder calls you and there's a change in scope of the project, and so you need to go back and relook at, so what's our new outcome, and how does that affect the current situation and the choices that we make. So you do very often go back and continue moving forward. And again, I think this is something that you all do
Right. And we do
naturally,
that.
um, and we're just presenting a framework for you to follow.
Absolutely, and that's exactly where I was going to go. Um, when we look at project management, it is iterative. Regardless of whether we're doing waterfall or agile, it is iterative. So, we start out, we figure out the scope, we, come up with the plan, we get permission to move forward, we get resourcing, we execute on that plan, we evaluate, we do risk management, we do all these things. But we're constantly doing it in a very iterative nature. And really the biggest difference between that whole agile waterfall thing is really how often and how quickly we iterate. There's some other nuanced differences, but they're very much similar. So to help put this into a context for this audience, I thought let's take a look at the Oscar model compared to project management. We started off with this whole outcome piece. Where do we want to end? The Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. We actually have that in a couple of our courses, right? When we talk about scope, begin with the end in mind. What's our destination? Where do we want to go? And really, this is about the scope definition. Where do we want to land? What's our finished thing that we're going to deliver? Talk about the situation. What's our current state? So hence that, we have our future, we have our current. We're right into a gap analysis. What's the void between the two, and how do we bridge that gap? So now we're getting into our choices, our planning of our project, including that risk management. What are the options of how we can go about doing this? We know where we are, we know where we want to be. What are our choices to get there? And I know there's when we talk in terms of, the gap analysis, a lot of times people are going, yeah, I'm not happy where I am. I know where I want to get to. I'm just not sure of how to bridge that void. And this is that opportunity for us to dig down into that. All of this is great, but unless we actually take action, it's not going to mean anything. So in the action step, we finalize our plans, we execute, we do the work. And as Barb identified, it can be very iterative. So as I'm going through, and if I just back up a step here, and I'm looking at the choices that I have, and I'm realizing some of those choices aren't acceptable, or maybe the consequence is too big, I may step back to outcome and redefine what that destination looks like, so that we can figure out what makes the best plan, and where to go and how to get there. We finalize that action plan, we execute, and then we review. And this is akin to the sign-off. It's done. We've executed. Did we make it? Did we get there? Did we deliver what we said we were going to deliver? So hence the sign-off. And then that brings us right into that whole project close piece, the lessons learned, the review of what we did well, where we could make improvements. Now, you referenced earlier methodology versus framework, and I want to dig into this a little bit. So with methodology, it's very prescriptive steps. We have them in a particular order, but more importantly, they're applied very consistently. So we think about a methodology, and we think in terms of project management methodology. And we're building widgets, we're creating software programs, we're building houses, we're doing whatever it is that our company or our project management office does. And we're often forced into this constant, here's the methodology, follow all of these steps. As we're a framework, it's also prescriptive steps. I mean, we just looked at Oscar. It has prescriptive steps. There are, 5 specific steps with specific elements to them. They are in a particular order, and they're in an order for a particular reason. But I think, and this is what Barb alluded to, is they're applied a little bit more creatively. When you're dealing with humans, we've got very complex beings. We're complex adaptive beings. So a methodology is great for the duplicatable piece. It's great for complicated. We look at a large build, a building, software, etc. It's complicated. But complex is a little different, because complex is complicated. There's lots of moving parts and pieces, but we get sort of more of a scientific standard reaction, A plus B equals C. As we're complex, we apply the same methodology to one human, to a different human, we get a different reaction. What are your thoughts around this, Barb?
I think where the adjusting to the situation and fitting into the complexity comes in regards to the Oscar model. It's the questions that you use and the steps of outcome, situation, choice, choices, action, and review. You know,
Hmm.
that, as you've just said, David, is the more prescriptive piece. But the questionings and what you decide to ask and how you ask it and when you ask it is very specific to the situation, to your team, to where the team's at, in a particular day.
Absolutely. And it really, I think it creates a nice distinction between the, okay, you've given me a very prescriptive model here, but yet you're telling me to, apply it creatively. And it's almost like we have, that same methodology that's being applied, but the context of how we apply it and who we're talking to and the subject of the conversation is going to modify and change. And this is where I think models like this can be very powerful because they're going to help us stay on track to what we're trying to get done and be productive while allowing us to have that flexibility. Now, this whole idea of complex versus complicated versus complex, some research that came out of York University and U of T by a couple of professors who are looking at different problems, and they came up with 3 classifications: simple, complicated, and complex. Simple is like baking a cake. You have a recipe. It's, we can do that fairly easily. Complicated, they use the analogy, it's like building a rocket to go to the moon. Lots of moving parts. There's lots of nuancy details here, but we can, you build rocket 1, rocket 2, rocket 3. Okay, we're starting to have that duplication. We can predict what's going on, that sort of thing. The framework side of it, though, is the complicated, or excuse me, the complex. And the analogy that really struck for me was, raising a child. If you have 2 or more children, how you raise the first child probably not going to work, or at least not perfectly on the second, right? Everyone is different. Everyone is, we apply the same things and we get different results. And we think of that in terms of how we manage our teams. And there's been a bit of an adjustment in that, treating people fair thing around, it used to be the model was, well, I'm going to treat people fairly across my team by giving everyone the same thing. And meanwhile, that's not really fair because different people, different motivations, different focuses, different needs. So what we need to do is look at how can we adjust what we're doing with people individually to give them what they need and help them grow and develop and hence be a contributing member to our team. And adjusting that to their needs. And this is where applying it more at a framework level versus a methodology is going to be, increasing that effect. So just to close out the loop here, we started off with our opening thought from Michael around focus on the real problem, not the first problem. And leveraging that Oscar model, we can, figure out what is the true outcome that we want to get to here. What are our options? How are we going to do this? Let's make a choice. Let's take some action. Let's implement that. And then we're going to review and close that out. So want to just turn it back over to Barb for a moment if there's any closing thoughts or comments, and just remind everyone we've got the chat box there. If you have any questions or comments or want to chime in on the conversation, please do. Barb, what are your thoughts on this as we close out today?
I hope that you have seen that the Oscar model provides a framework for something that you're already doing, and yet maybe you can see that there's not only application in project management, but application for a whole lot of other circumstances and situations. And I think in subsequent modules, you're going to get into more of the open-ended questions and see how the coaching process actually works. And that's when you can then bring the questions and the type of questions together with the Oscar model, and it'll have even more meaning for you.
Absolutely. So now that we have that framework, we're going to dig in the next one of our series around things like how to ask those questions, how to structure them, how to frame them. When we ask questions, it's easy to put someone on the defensive. So being skilled at crafting that question and presenting it is going to be a key thing for folks. So Catherine just chimed in, great job. Thank you for the compliment. Interesting model within a framework. Is there a course specifically for PMs where they can practice this? Absolutely. So as always, if you liked what we did today and you're interested in more, please feel free to reach out and contact us. Nice segue there because we've got our contact info down the bottom. I know many of you are looking for PDUs, so there's our PDU code at the top. And of course, feel free to reach out to either myself directly or Barb if you want to continue the conversation. Thank you, Rudolph, for the compliment. So unless there's any other questions or thoughts, we've got a couple minutes before the hour. Give you guys time to get to your next meetings because I know we're all rushing off. I'm going to stay on the line for a few minutes. Otherwise, have a great day, and we will see you next month in the third of our series as we start to, now that we have a framework to work within, we'll start to dig into that and look at, what are some of the skills that can help us implement. Want to again thank Barb for your time today. Greatly appreciate it. It's been a huge benefit, and we'll look forward to our next session.
My pleasure.